There are certain times when you need to provide a whole bunch of detail. And so, I think this is one of those cases where if we can be, as transparent and as detailed as possible, hopefully it's going to ease the friction associated with concerns around privacy. I mean, one of the other things that I didn't mention was the key driver for this initiative, to be honest, was the fact that we were just getting so many questions coming from customers around how can they use this stuff compliantly, and they just needed help. That was then taking up huge amounts of internal time with our customer engagement people. And I was like, well, there's a bottleneck here that we need to sort of unblock. What can we do to unblock the bottleneck? Sounds like if we come up with this material, look, is this going to be good enough for every single customer? Absolutely not. Is it going to be good enough, I hope, for 90% of our customers? Absolutely. So it sort of speaks to the title of the whole series of the sessions.
So if we dig in maybe to the AI one, because I think that's probably where this group are particularly interested. You can see it from the conference sessions this week.
Yep.
There are lots of issues that worry people. I think maybe the four biggest that crop up a lot, come across my desk, are the boundary around controllership.
Yep.
What point does customer stop being controller, or maybe supplier does for the purposes of product improvement, model training? That's maybe issue number one. Issue number two is the kind of surfacing of documents, surfacing of information through the use of AI, the kind of permissioning challenge inside organisations. And the third is around international transfers.
Yep.
You guys I know have done an awful lot of work there.
Yep.
And then the last one is retention. I mean, it's something that is a challenge for all of us working in privacy, but there's a retention issue thing to talk about when deploying these tools as well. So those are the four issues maybe we want to dive into in a little bit more detail. We may go on to questions from the floor. They may have other pet topics they want to pick up. But let's start with that point around controllership.
Yeah.
So where does that boundary stop between when customer is controlling where you are?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, in the context of Office 365 and general cloud use, it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. We're the data processor. But in the context of artificial intelligence, 9 times out of 10, we remain the processor. But there are very limited, and this is in the context of what we call our Copilot products. So for those that are familiar with cloud, it's more like software as so SaaS offerings, where we're providing the entirety of the service, unlike platform or infrastructure as a service in the cloud context. So with our Copilot products, we're a processor still, except in the event that we're providing what we call these enhanced services, where we are in limited decision-making mode as to deciding, what happens with the data. So for all intents and purposes, most of the time we're the processor. In limited circumstances, we're the controller.
You talk about optional connected experiences, and there's a clue in that name, right?
Yeah.
So this is where you start to take on a controllership role. So talk about those to the extent you can. Optional connected.
Yeah, and I'll give an example of this optional connected experience in the context of let's just use email. I think many of you are probably familiar with when you're hopefully typing your emails now, you'll see some preemptive texting, preemptive text coming up to suggest some words that you should probably use. I love it because I'm not a great speller and sometimes need some inspiration as to what to say. That sort of feature or functionality is, interestingly, where we've determined that we take on a controllership role because we're determining the use of the data. Now, the more sort of complex product offerings, you can imagine that sort of becomes even more of an important role that we take on. So what we say is we're a controller in that sense, and so based on the terms and conditions, we step up to controller obligations and responsibilities and contractually adhere to those. But in every other sense of the word, when people are using our Copilot products, we're the processor and they're the controller.
And the key. Sorry.
You go on. I've got a memory like a goldfish. Where you want me to go is on the notion of flexibility and choice.
Correct. Exactly.
It's a really interesting point, and I think if I look back at how we sort of deliver our products, and I'm just saying we're sort of the only ones that do this. The flexibility and choice that you'll find that sort of cloud providers and now AI providers provide is so distinct from what it was years and years and years ago. So what we try and do to the maximum extent possible is build in sort of optionality into our product offering. So those enhanced features that we were talking about, the preemptive texting and all the rest of it, if people don't feel comfortable with Microsoft being the controller in that type of situation, we build in the ability for people to toggle that off. Because we know that certain organisations, certain individuals have heightened concerns in relation to who's the controller and who's the processor. And I guess that's a really interesting point because, and it's the same in the context of cloud. You know, I think the cloud of today is so different to the cloud that was, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. You know, the AI of today is so different to what the AI of, tomorrow. I mean, who knows what the AI of tomorrow is going to look like. But I think the direction of travel, and certainly the direction that Microsoft is taking, is to try and build as much flexibility into these product offerings as humanly possible. Therefore, you're giving users, companies, corporations, governments the choices that they need to feel comfortable from a privacy, security and a compliance standpoint. So it's all about flexibility and choice. I've got a memory like a goldfish. Your second point was to do...
No, so
with...
I'm going to come on to that. I'm just going to read out to you a bit of the DPI just to kind of bang this point home because I think it's super clear. And look, all of the council in this room will have spent a lot of time reading product terms for Microsoft's competitors. And they're not very clear, are they? I think we can all agree that some of those. But this is super clear, right? So under the terms of the product and terms of DPA, we are the controller of personal data. That's the customer's voice there. We are the controller. And Microsoft is the processor of such data. There are no product-specific exemptions to this arrangement within Microsoft 365 Copilot, none, except for the optional connected experiences, and then the DPIA describes all those. That seems to me, as a privacy lawyer, looking at those kinds of issues, super helpful to get your head around what is going on inside a Copilot implementation. Really, really valuable. Okay, so the second issue I wanted to talk to you about was permissioning. So you talk in the DPIA about context and the importance of context when Copilot is thinking about questions. Yep. Talk to me about that and what the implications are for permissioning.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're having a really interesting conversation. I think I met the entire Finnish contingent delegation here, and we're having a great conversation about the use of technology and the concerns that people have with technology, and the issue of permissioning is front and centre. But I think it's almost bigger than that. Certainly, the conversations that I'm having with governments all around the world, what they're really saying is it's bigger than just privacy, and I don't want to diminish privacy. It's about data more generally. Most people, just about everyone is concerned about using artificial intelligence because they're worried about what data is going to be exposed to the large language models. They're concerned about, certainly governments are, in the context of data classification and data governance frameworks, making the technology available to their civil servants and it being exposed to information it shouldn't see. And it's a really interesting one because so people come to me and come to us with concerns around exposing data and using artificial intelligence. But where we end up getting to is talking about how the emerging digital transformation technologies like cloud and now artificial intelligence actually have inbuilt features which enable permissioning to happen automatically. So
before you rush into that, let's just walk through the problem statement because I want to make sure that everyone is clear about this. So the challenge that people worry about when it comes to implementing Copilot is that Copilot looks at content in context. So if I ask a question of my Copilot implementation, it produces answers using Richard's context. So it will produce answers based on all the information inside my organisation that I have, in theory, rights to look at.
Yes.
And that turns, of course, on how good permissioning is inside my organisation. If the permissioning inside my organisation is rock solid, yippee. If it turns out that, in fact, the firm's super secret strategy that involves firing Richard next week has not been locked down, I suddenly get to find out about that through my use of Copilot.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is the implementation challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Microsoft saying, oh, look, Holly, it's not just a technology problem. There's a bunch of tools that can help, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of tools that can help, but I think it's the old story, and it was great because it was raised in earlier sessions. you need to have training as it relates to the use of these products. Training is going to build better use of the technology. It's going to build confidence, and it's just going to make it all work better. The worst thing that can possibly happen is, and human nature is, if in doubt, often don't. So what can we do to remove the doubt, remove those concerns as it relates to, in this case, exposing the large language models to data that it shouldn't see? And that's, interestingly, where technology can actually come in and help. But at the end of the day, you need decent data hygiene, you need training, you need, good administrators who sort of oversee the use of these products. But, the technology can help enormously as it relates to the automatically classify the data and the information and ring fence materials that shouldn't be exposed to, anyone other than yourself, for example. So it's that really interesting thing. People come to us because they're concerned about the technology and being able to use it in a compliant way. And where we end up getting to is that the technology can actually help you comply, which I've just always found is a really sort of interesting sort of place to arrive.
We talk about my third challenge.
Yep.
Retention.
Yeah.
So that's an issue that this room has wrestled with endlessly.
Yeah.
So what do you say about retention in these documents?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the whole retention issue, it comes down to two things in general. The first is, and we sort of state this in our terms, and I'm sure our sort of other technology providers do, at the end of the day, the customer owns the data. The customer determines when to delete the data, remove the data. The administrator has Uber access rights to sort of make decisions in relation to the data. And then at the end of the term of the contract, we have a contractual obligation to remove the data within, I think it's 90 days. And we are certified against that. It kind of makes sense, really, because the more data we've got in our data centres, the more they cost to run. So we're not going to keep data in our data centres, unless to be honest, our customers are paying for that. But it's a more serious point than that. We understand that there are compliance requirements and compliance obligations. And that's how we help customers, demonstrate.
When we talk about retention here, we're talking about a couple of different things, aren't we? We're talking about effectively prompts going into Copilot and outputs coming out.
Yep.
Those are the kind of key retention
issues
there.
In the context of sort of Copilot and the use of large language models, but putting aside what we commit to contractually do at the end of the contractual term, and that we are audited against, administrators and in fact users are able to delete their prompts. Yes. So that's another example of trying to build as much flexibility into these products themselves, so it meets the needs and the expectations of the more demanding and exacting of users. And then those that are just happy to rely on us doing it all for them, they know that at the end of the 90-day period, it's going to be deleted.
And that's a really great example, it seems to me, of where the DPIA templates that you produce can help privacy folk in this room understand the optionality that maybe their commercial folk are not revealing to them. So you get a sense of the different tunable elements of your solution that may help you get comfortable, if you're a privacy lawyer in this room, with the implementation of that solution. There may be some options that you can implement to get you over the line. Yeah,
absolutely. And then your fourth point.
So, international transfers, which I think I've talked about international transfers at this conference for about 20 years. So there's no. I'm tempted to say there's no new things under the sun, but that's not true here. Yeah. Because you guys have really moved on from where cloud vendors were maybe 15 years ago, which is, it's a shared solution, it's a shared piece of infrastructure. Yeah. We're not going to tell you where the data is. Talk about where we are now.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of the cloud of yesterday is different from the cloud of today, and it's probably going to be very different to the cloud of tomorrow. So, I think once upon a time, when I was having conversations, this is particularly the case with government, but every customer is concerned, where their data is located. And what we've undertaken over the last number of years is a huge amount of work to essentially create what we call a European Union sort of data boundary. So all of our European Union customers' data is maintained within the bounds of the European Union. And, what we understood was that we didn't need to do that to enable customers to demonstrate compliance with the GDPR. But, there's something sort of emotive about people wanting their data as close as humanly possible to where they're located. And in this case, in the context of this conversation, it's Europe. And I have the same conversations with governments in Australia, which is where I'm from, or in Singapore, or in the United States, or wherever. People want their data to be as close to home as possible. Notwithstanding that, all of our security protocols and procedures and privacy requirements and stuff are absolutely consistent across the globe, people want to know where their data is located. And so, we've done a huge amount of work to ensure that, European Union users' data is kept in the European Union.
And you've got, if I understand right, when we talk about data in the European Union, we're actually talking about 3 different solutions, right? So you've got a public sovereign cloud solution. You've also got a private sovereign cloud solution. Yep. And then there's a local partnering solution as well.
Yeah. So, I guess where that goes to is, and, I can dig into the details of that, but it might send people to sleep. But we're just trying to provide as many options to customers as is humanly possible, from sort of just general public cloud right the way across to sort of our services being provided by, a large telco in France or in Germany, which is in essentially a sort of a private cloud type sort of situation. It's all about flexibility. It's all about choice, because we recognise that that's what customers want.
Yep.
And trying to design something that's as fit for as many people as possible is really important.
And there are some organisations, there may not be any in this room, I don't know, but historically there have certainly been some organisations that are, when push comes to shove, just not comfortable having their data hosted by a company incorporated in the United States, ultimately with a US listing, who is within reach of the US government, and those solutions deliver an alternative route for that, which is remarkable.
Yeah, no, it is. We live in very interesting sort of times geopolitically, but at the same time, I think what a really positive thing to come out of all of that geopolitical uncertainty is this concept that I think the private sector can play an important role, and the president of Microsoft sort of talks about this, that public companies like ours can actually play an important role in building a bridge across across the Atlantic, to sort of provide sort of a degree of harmony and let's just keep the global economy working. But we've done some things recently which I think are really interesting. We've established a board, a European board, that essentially has oversight of our European data centres, just to sort of give another degree of Europeanness to our operation. Things like, when there's a service request of a customer, a European Union customer, that has to go to a European Union citizen to sort of consider the request. So what we're trying to do is build in as many layers of, I'd say as many checks and balances as possible to give the service offering as much of a European flavour as it can possibly have, acknowledging that we're a US company. But I think one of the other terms that our president uses is, we build these data centres and we spend billions and billions of dollars building them out, but they're not built on wheels. They are staying where they are. It's that commitment to doing business. But we need to make sure that what we're doing is fit for purpose for what people expect. And I think it's going to be a constant process of refining our terms and conditions for the lawyers of our customers who want to see more, making more flexibility and choice, building that into the product offering. And the great thing is that the technology is evolving, and the way in which we can deliver things now compared to 5 years ago is so different that we should always be able to meet the needs from a compliance standpoint.
So, because as well as those we just talked about hosting locations really, so public cloud, private cloud, third party, you've also got a bunch of other tools, which some of them will be familiar to people, maybe some are not. So you've also got a CMAC solution, so customer managed encryption key solution. Yep. You've got a EU Data Guardian solution around permissioning of access to those outside of Europe, those kind of controls.
Yep.
And then you've got going back a bit further now, so the defending your data commitments made a couple of years ago, which were really remarkable commitments around your commitments to refusing access.
Yeah, and the defending your, I say data, I think. I guess it sort of goes to that geopolitical issue, and what the defending the data issue goes to is that, I know we know that there are often concerns around sort of government access requests in relation to data that sort of sits within our sort of data centres, and we understood, especially those of us out there doing the deals with our customers and having to try and explain to customers, it's not enough to sort of say, look, we get your concern. It's more of a perception issue than a reality issue. And customers understandably would say, I don't care, it's an issue. What are you going to do? And so what we did sort of many years ago was build in contractual commitments to sort of basically say, to say, we will litigate and, until the cows come home. What we do is in the first instance, if there's a request for access to customer data, we redirect that sort of request or to the customer, because it's the customer's data at the end of the day. We think they should know.
Yeah.
And if then the customer declines that request and then the law enforcement comes to us and we determine that it's not a valid law enforcement request, we will litigate and take these things incredibly seriously. The other thing we do is we publish a transparency report, and biannually or annually, to disclose the number of requests that happen. Overwhelmingly, well, not even whatever's more sort of, more than overwhelmingly, it all relates to, consumer information and consumer data, not corporations or governments. But at the end of the day, I get that it's a perception issue that we have to address, and, we do that through the contractual commitments.
So what do you think about those movies? Hosting location, what transfers you need to think about, and then we just talk about some supplementary measures. CMAC, defending your data. Out of interest, this is a room full of privacy lawyers, right? Who is familiar with the defending your data solution, the Microsoft defending your data solution?
Well, everyone is now, because I've just talked about it.
Yeah. The bit that we haven't talked about is if you go and look at it, and I think it is remarkable and was market moving at the time, was the indemnity. There's an indemnity in favour of data subjects where their data is accessed in an appropriate way, which is a really significant commitment by Microsoft, really amazing. So that I think is the four areas that I wanted to pick out of your template DPIAs.
Yep.
So, what next?
As in, where's it all going?
Yeah.
Look, I think it's just going to be a constant journey. The technology is, I'm often asked by customers, where's AI going to be in 5 years' time? I have no idea. What I then say in response is, it's going to be ubiquitous. We're all going to be using it. So therefore, what I think we all need to be doing today is looking at regulation and policy that is potentially inhibiting the adoption of the technology. I'm a lawyer by training. I'm not in the business of saying, let's use this technology at all cost. Absolutely not. We need to be building trust. We often sort of talk about the fact unless people trust the technology, they're not going to use the technology. How do you demonstrate trust? Well, you engage in conversations like this one, not only to sort of talk about how we think we deal with compliance, but it's also to get feedback on what more people need to see. But yeah, look, the conversations that I'm having with governments, I think the big issue is around data and how people can feel comfortable exposing...
Not just personal data, but all
data
sorts of data.
More generally. I'm not sure how many in the room are from government, but I think a lot of governments are really taking time to think about whether they've got appropriate data governance frameworks in place, and a component of a data governance framework is obviously data classification. I think there are some governments that recognise that they need to modernise their approach to data classification. I think they recognise that a lot of it is perhaps a little bit too prescriptive, and those prescriptive requirements may be a bit dated, and not enable them to embrace the technology that they have to embrace this technology. As we're all aware, governments all around the world are so starved of resources. You know, money's tight, and they recognise that technology can really bring huge cost savings and efficiencies and increase citizen experience, which is paramount for governments. But a lot of them are coming to us and sort of saying we need to change our approach to this, help us modernise our approach. And you know, it's not a sort of necessarily exciting topic, but procurement is constantly raised as a pain point for governments to be able to use this stuff. But I think data classification and data governance, I think we're all going to be talking a lot more about it in the future. I think it's probably fair to say that we're seeing huge appetite for regulated industries, all companies and governments around the world spinning up use cases to play with the technology, to play with artificial intelligence. There's probably a bit of a slowness to embrace it at scale and pace, and I think a lot of that is to do with uncertainty as to how people can use it compliantly. So I think that's what we all need to sort of work out together.
Yeah. And presumably, you said this is version 1, and you'd like to do version 2. So if people in this room have feedback on version 1, then they should let you guys know, right? Absolutely. You'd love that kind of feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, and it's what we did in the context of cloud computing about 12 years ago. I sort of was the lead lawyer for Asia, and I sort of had government affairs responsibility as well. And what I sort of did back in those days was go on a sort of a listening and a learning tour to meet, especially with the financial services regulators, because the way in which we were sort of thinking about it was if we could sell cloud computing to sort of the most exacting bank in, say, Singapore, we should be pretty fit for purpose to sell to anywhere in the world and to anyone in the world. And it was really interesting because from those conversations, they were telling us what we needed to do differently, which was, and the banking regulators as well, because I would go and meet with all the banking regulators around the region and sort of say, I've read your outsourcing guidelines. I'm 100% sure that we can meet those requirements, but I suspect there might be some invisible boxes that you as the regulator might need to tick.
Yeah.
Tell me about those invisible boxes. And a lot of that is to deal with the perception issues that they have. And then we redesigned our contractual terms and conditions
to reflect that.
based on the feedback. So, doing that, all boats hopefully rise.